Hey, y'all. Welcome to another episode of the Krista Cali podcast. Today, I'd love to share with you my founder story. Not just any founder story. I used to perceive it as like a shameful, quote unquote, shameful founder story. And this story involves civil war, genocide, hurricanes, a beautiful love story, and a pursuit of the American dream. I'd like to take you back to the 1960s. My parents were both born in 1961 in Guatemala. Little did the world know that this was the beginning of a Guatemalan civil war. And it wasn't until recently that I read that this was also considered and referred to as the silent Holocaust. I was born in February of 1990, also in Guatemala. So my parents were born during the beginning of the Civil War, and I was born towards the end of it, just to set the picture of what this looked like for us. And, I wasn't born Christy Cali. I was actually born Silvia Cristina Asturias. And by the time I came into the picture, both of my parents had gone through so much. They immigrated to the United States in the early 1980s. And if you could just imagine what the situation was like then in Guatemala, I'd actually like to read you a little bit of what I found on a PBS News website to help you understand what the state was in that country. More than 200,000 people were killed over the course of a 36-year-long civil war that began in 1960 and ended with peace accords in 1996. About 83% of those killed were Mayan. According to a 1999 report written by the UN-backed Commission for Historical Clarification titled Guatemala, Memory of Silence, the report also concluded that the vast majority, 93% of human rights violations perpetrated during the conflict were carried out by state forces and military groups. Kidnappings in Guatemala during the 1980s were a central systematic tool of state terror employed by the height of the Guatemalan Civil War, particularly between 1981 and 1983. These acts were largely forced disappearances carried out by government security forces, military intelligence, and paramilitary death squads against perceived political opponents, students, union leaders, and indigenous populations. But what the news doesn't tell you, and what I can share with you from my family stories and our family's friend stories, is that there was a lot of drug violence going on too. And just generally speaking, there was so much chaos happening. You didn't know who was a part of what, who they were representing, and it was just so much chaos and madness and confusion. My mom told me that one of her best friend's sisters was kidnapped and murdered when they were in high school. And I just heard so many stories of Guatemala being unsafe, and I can very much understand why my parents particularly wanted to pursue the American dream. So fast forward to February of 1990, I came along and my parents had already established themselves in the United States. My father even served in the U.S. military for several years, did some time in Korea. My mom followed him there illegally, apparently. But they were very much madly in love, and they were a little crazy. And they did some really interesting things in the pursuit of love and also in the pursuit of the American dream. So to set the picture for you, I was born a naturalized citizen since they were already both American citizens. And I was also brought up in this dualistic world. I had no idea until I was probably a teenager that I grew up completely different from most. I was raised between these two places, New Orleans and Guatemala City. New Orleans because somehow my father fell in love with the city when he was given the option of where to go to school, as it was being sponsored by the military. And he ended up going to the University of New Orleans in the 80s. And my mom supported him unconditionally. So my father went to school while he also worked in the French market, in the French Quarter. He was exporting all of these really funky goods from Guatemala, like hacky sacks, backpacks, those like Bob Marley hats with the dreads included. I remember those distinctly. And my mom helped him out, but my mom had established a very successful high-end luxury children's boutique in Guatemala City. And that's where we got caught, or I got caught between these two worlds. My father was in the States, my mother was in Guatemala. They were both very successful business owners, entrepreneurs. And so I went to school year round. I remember class in Guatemala as like a first grader and also in New Orleans, and it's all pretty fuzzy. Needless to say, fast forward to, I think I was probably in second or third grade when my parents sat me down and they asked me, a 7-year-old, an only child, where would you like to spend the rest of your childhood? Would you like to be raised in New Orleans or in Guatemala? And again, going back to what I shared earlier, there was always a sense of fear whenever we were in Guatemala. I remember my mom used to always like look around her. Actually, oh my gosh, I can't believe I almost forgot about this. It was around the same time, maybe just a few years earlier before they asked me this. My mom was dropping off my great-grandmother at a family member's house. I was already in the car, in the back seat. My great-grandmother was getting out of the car. My mom was driving. Her door was closed. And I think my aunt and uncle were helping my great-grandmother get out of the car when all of a sudden there was a tap at my mom's window. And it was nighttime. My mom looks over and it's a man with a gun. I don't know what kind of gun it was, but all I remember was my mom yelling at him, telling him to leave us alone, that I was in the back. And my mom says, "Christy, hide underneath the seat." And I was maybe 5 years old. Next thing I know, my mom speeds off and she's freaking out, crying. My great-grandmother had fallen out of the car. There was so much yelling and commotion. And I just remember my mom driving hysterically for, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes. But apparently, someone had tried to steal my mom's car while I was in the back seat. And they chased us and they shot at us. It was not good. It was not good. And just so y'all know, as you get to know me a little bit, I have a really strange sense of humor. I laugh probably during some inappropriate things because that's how I deal with some dark, difficult things. So if I'm laughing, it's just how I deal with stuff. Anyway, I share that because I just remember being scared a lot in Guatemala. There was always these horror stories from family members and friends of terrible things that have happened. And so when they sat me down as a 7-year-old, probably around the time that this war was ending, and they asked me, "Christy, where would you like to be raised?" I thought to myself, well, would I like to continue to live in a country where you could leave the front door unlocked, where there's no fence around my front yard, where I can freely ride my bicycle a couple of blocks is what I was allowed in Metairie, Louisiana? Or would I like to be raised in a country where we always have to look over our shoulders, where everyone has a gun and there are basically security and just hired men with rifles outside of any store? And so you can imagine what I chose as a 7-year-old. So if you fast forward, I decided to be raised in the United States, and my parents would bring me back every summer to stay connected with family. As an only child growing up in a different country, I felt very isolated, alone, and unsupported. So not having, a community around me, a family unit, was tough. And when I started getting bullied in elementary school first of all, for being like one of the very few Latinos in school, for having curly, frizzy hair, for being darker, for speaking a different language, you can kind of see how it was not hard for a child to fall into chronic depression. And I know my parents were doing the best at the time, but my parents didn't really give me any advice on how to deal with that. They were going through so much in putting a roof over our heads, working. I didn't see them very much. I was probably staying home alone way too young. That was probably legal or acceptable, but that's how it was. And no fault to my parents. I love them very much, but I really wish my dad would have taught me how to stand up for myself, or if my mom would have given me some advice to help empower me instead of the advice of just ignore them and belittle myself. And that's where the belittlement really started. I started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. I tried to hide during recess. I never really played with other kids at recess because I just had no friends. I had a really hard time making connections because I was raised between two different worlds, and I felt like nobody in the States really understood me. Nobody in Guatemala really understood me. And so it just created this very fractured foundation upon which I built my life. And I promise you the story has a happy ending. So don't get too depressed as I'm sharing the story with you. But things get better when I get into high school. I go to an all-girls school, uptown New Orleans, one of the oldest schools in the country, Ursuline Academy. It was the first time that I ever felt truly accepted. I was never bullied at that school, and I felt free to be myself. There were other ethnic girls that went to school there. There were also other curly-haired girls there. I finally started wearing my hair curly in high school, also because I was surrounded by other girls that taught me how to do it. And so Ursuline was the beginning of a really great chapter in my life where I started making more friends. And while I never really had a super, super tight group of girlfriends in high school, I feel like I was kind of a lone wolf where I just mingled around everywhere a little bit. This is where the story gets really interesting. So it's 2005 in New Orleans, probably second, third week of August. I remember it was the first week of my sophomore year at Ursuline Academy. At this point, both of my parents, so my mom closed the children's boutique, right? Because we decided to focus our lives in the United States. My parents went all into their businesses in New Orleans, and my parents at that point had already opened up 2 jewelry stores in the French Quarter. And for those that don't know what that store was called, and it's still there, this is being recorded in March of 2026. So it's still there today, one of them. Sterling Sylvia. The name of my family's French Quarter jewelry stores is Sterling Sylvia. My mom's name is Sylvia. And remember what I told you at the beginning. I was born Silvia Cristina. So sophomore year, we had only been in school for maybe not even a week. And there were new girls that had come into sophomore year. I was making new friends. It was a new high point in my life. I finally felt like I was integrating, and all of a sudden comes Hurricane Katrina. What I remember is that, so my father's a pilot. He's a private pilot. He co-owns a plane with some other individuals. And so we had access to a 182 Cessna. We also had a big golden retriever at the time, and we had decided to stay. But it wasn't until the final 24 hours that my dad got scared, and he said, I think we really need to go. And I remember my dad saying that we were the 7th last in line to depart from Lakefront Airport right before Hurricane Katrina hit. And we went to Houston. And just like so many other hurricanes before, I didn't think much of it. I didn't think that anything was going to happen. I even felt like a sense of assurance or a sense of knowing in myself that nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen. Boy, was I wrong. This was one of the most tragic things to ever happen in the entire world. There were a lot of girls that I never saw again after that. So many people were displaced. It was a really terrible time in New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. So I'm not going to get into all the things that happened in my life during Hurricane Katrina because we could be here forever. But I want to bring it back to my founder story. My parents both my parents lost all of their employees because of Hurricane Katrina. Remember, they had two jewelry stores in the French Quarter. One was on Toulouse. The other one that still remains is on French Marketplace. Their employees pretty much all lived either in Chalmette, New Orleans East, or Lakeview, all places that got incredibly devastated. And so my parents had shipped me off to live with a friend of theirs in Miami, and I was okay there for a while. I was like, Miami, the beach, and I was making new friends. I knew how to make friends at that point, so I was doing better. I was a refugee. I was like the displaced girl, and everybody was interested in my story. I was kind of popular at this Miami high school, and I felt pretty good about myself. But the longer I stayed away from my parents, the more I missed them. And the more that I saw the rebuilding process in New Orleans, I really wanted to be a part of that. But Ursuline hadn't opened yet, and there was no place for me to go to school until we found out about Rommel Transition. So if anybody watching this went to Rommel Transition, Rommel T, oh my gosh, what's up? It was such a great time to be in New Orleans because all of these high schools, Ursuline, Mount Carmel, Brother Martin, Jesuit, Holy Cross, we all went to high school together in the afternoon while Rommel went to school during the day. It was a really cool time where we all got to go to school together instead of being separate like we normally were. So it was during that time that my mom said, okay, you can come back, but we really need your help. And I said, that's why I want to come back. I want to come back and help. I want to come back and be a part of the rebuilding process and be useful and have a, you have a sense of purpose when you know you're making a difference. So my mom agreed for me to come back. And all I did was dedicate all of the free time that I had when I wasn't in school to help her with the stores. And that started a 7-year run of me dedicating basically every ounce of energy that I had outside of school to their business, to their jewelry business. And it was during that time that I learned so much about the jewelry industry. My parents also took me on buying trips. So my parents would go to Hong Kong, Thailand, Indonesia, Mexico, Tasco, Mexico, in case anyone's ever been. They went all over the world to buy jewelry from different designers, from different like handcraft markets. And while they were in their offices buying and doing business, I was hanging out with the artists, learning how they made the jewelry, watching them, talking to them. And I just fell in love with the craft of jewelry making. So fast forward, let's see. I was 15 years old when I started helping my parents with their jewelry businesses. I was 15 years old when I started helping my parents with their jewelry stores in the French Quarter. And I did that for 7 years. During those 7 years, though, is where shit kind of got real. My mom is a very, very intelligent, smart, street savvy, intuitive woman. So am I. I also was going to Loyola University for international business with the intention to take over their business. So I was dedicating my life, my entire being to uplifting, elevating, and growing their business. And so when I had ideas and I had concepts and I was learning things in school and I was doing my best to apply them in the store, I got a lot of resistance from my mom. And that did not feel good because all I wanted was to make her happy, was to grow her business. And I started noticing a very toxic dynamic happen where whenever I had a really great idea and I started making money, I started designing jewelry, I started selling, I was rewarded emotionally for it. And then as I made mistakes in the store, as I, maybe invested in the wrong thing, I was punished for it at home. So a lot of things started happening between my mom and I working together that were not good for our relationship as mother and daughter. And my mom and I also didn't get along that well when I was growing up. So this validation seeking dynamic within the store became incredibly toxic. And my mom is just, she could be kind of a nervous wreck. When she gets overwhelmed, she just gets like very tense and she kind of can shut down a little bit. And so also, while I'm sharing all of this, and I know that my mom is going to be watching this too, please don't make my mom to be the villain. I don't want to make anyone in my story, as I share the story, a villain. We all can be the villain in someone else's story. And for a long time, I didn't tell this story because I was afraid. I didn't want my mom to be punished for me sharing my truth. And I want to clarify that I love my mom very much. We have a great relationship right now. And, I want to protect that at all costs. So let's just say that during those 7 years, there was a lot of tension, a lot of dysfunctional dynamics between my mom and myself. So that built up over the years. And there were some things like, I tried to talk to my mom multiple times and say, hey, if you're going to be upset with me, if you're going to, correct me, please don't do it in front of customers. It really hurts my feelings and I feel it's very inappropriate when you scold me in front of customers. It just doesn't feel right. And that was the one thing that just kept repeating over and over. And so where I'm going with this is that a lot of animosity and tension had built up between us over the years. And so let's fast forward to May 2012. I had just graduated from Loyola University. I went on this spectacular international business trip with the school where I got to learn so much about Asian business culture, which is exactly where the jewelry industry thrives. And we got to meet the CEO of Hermes China. I learned all of these things about branding and marketing, and I wanted to bring that back to her. I wanted to bring that back to Sterling Sylvia. I had such an intense dream of making Sterling Sylvia this national, international jewelry retail store. And I don't know if my mom didn't see it, if she didn't agree with it. I don't know if it was because it was hers and, she didn't trust me. I have no idea to this day why there was so much resistance and lack of trust or belief in me. And I think that's where I really got hurt along the way between me and my mom. Is it felt like she didn't trust me. She didn't believe in me. And sometimes it felt like she was sabotaging me. And look, this very, very much could not be true, but this is my truth and this is what I believed and how I felt at the time. And so I graduate. There's no clarity around finances around myself. I'm very much at the mercy of my parents paying me whatever they want to pay me. And I felt like a servant. I felt like I didn't have a voice and my future was entirely in their hands. That made me incredibly uncomfortable. Anytime I tried to bring up the money conversation about what is this structure going to look like? How can I have ownership? How can you help empower me so that this is a win-win scenario? And that conversation was very much avoided. There's a major sense of avoidance within my family. So one day, it was summer 2012. Remember, Christy Asturias just graduated from Loyola University. She's having this very difficult relationship with her mother. Father isn't helping. Father just takes mom's side. And then my father was caught in between the two women that he loves, right? He's caught in the middle. He's sandwiched in the middle like an Oreo. And he tries to protect her. He tries to protect me. It's just a big clusterfuck of a mess. Anyway, I don't feel like anybody's on my team. I am still struggling, seriously struggling with self-value, with self-worth. I was 22 years old in May of 2012. I was probably very arrogant, thought I knew it all, but was still eager to learn, figure things out. And I aspired to be a very successful business owner in New Orleans, but also I had a dream of designing and developing my own jewelry brand. And I thought that Sterling Sylvia was the vessel to make that happen. So that not only was I representing designers from around the world, but I also had my own in-house brand that came from me. One day I decided to go out and I'm feeling sexy. I'm feeling pretty. I have my little mini skirt on with some wedges and a tank top and my push-up bra and my hair and everything. And I'm going out to Latin night because I want to dance. I want to go dance some salsa. So there are some friends of mine that are out at this club called Republic. And at the time, I was friends with the owner of the valet company that serviced Republic. And so I call him up and I'm like, hey, I want to go to salsa night. Do you want to come with me? And he says, yeah, I just got a call from this guy that needs to park his Lamborghini out front at Republic. Let me just wait for him and then we can go together. And I'm like, okay, sure. So I meet him at Republic because he's waiting on this Lamborghini guy. And so he asks me, Chrissy, just wait for him. When he shows up, can you direct him, entertain him, and direct him to where he needs to park? Because I got to go run an errand. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I'm standing out there on South Peter Street in New Orleans with my miniskirt, wedges, the whole thing. And I see this baby blue Lamborghini pull up. I'm on the passenger side. So I wave at him to show him that, please wait here. And the passenger window rolls down. And it's Q Dodson from Pimp My Ride. I didn't know who the white dude driving the car was, but I recognized Q Dodson. And I'm like, oh my God. I tell him how my dad and I loved watching Pimp My Ride when I was growing up. And, one thing leads to another. Eventually, whoever else was in the car, they start talking to me. And let's see, long story short, we all end up inside of Republic and we start taking some shots. And the driver of this Lamborghini has started to take an interest in me. But I really wanted to go salsa dancing. So I'm like, can we all move this party over to, what was it called? Eiffel Society on St. Charles for some kind of Wednesday night salsa. And we did. Anyway, I end up in the Lamborghini. I kick Q Dodson out of the Lamborghini. I take his place. And I'm going to take a page out of Emma Page's Too Much podcast book. Emma likes to name her boyfriends or ex-boyfriends like certain names so she protects their identity. So we're going to call him Mr. Lamborghini. So Mr. Lamborghini invites me to ride with him from Republic to Eiffel Society. And let's just say, y'all, the rest is history. Mr. Lamborghini and I started a relationship. And again, remember, he was also 19 years older than me. I had such low self-worth. I really struggled believing in myself. I probably had really fake confidence back then. But somehow, we ended up falling in love. And we couldn't have fallen in love at a better time in my life, because it all went downhill so quickly after that between me and my family. So my mom, gosh, how do I tell this story? It's such a long story. A few months before I graduated from Loyola University, I actually helped my parents open a second location on Magazine Street in New Orleans. They actually had to close down the Toulouse store after Hurricane Katrina. So we opened another second location on Magazine Street. I was running that store completely by myself, but I was also living in that building. And my mom had purchased the building so that we could open the store there, and she was renting all of the other units out in that building, including my apartment. I was paying my mom rent to live in that apartment in the same building. So let's fast forward to one day in September of 2012. I remember we had decided to do this jewelry show at the Pontchartrain Center in Kenner. And there was this woman who came to the show specifically to look for me to buy jewelry designs that I had produced earlier that year. I had just come out with like my Crescent City collection. It was my first self-produced jewelry line that my mom helped to finance for me. And I think this woman probably spent like $400 or $500 at the time. Like, I mean, that's still a lot of money, but we're talking like 2012. When people started buying my jewelry designs, it was one of the greatest feelings of of validation, affirmation, and confirmation as a woman, as an artist, as a designer. And this woman had just finished spending all of this money. I was giving her a hug. I was thanking her for coming out of her way to find me and like collect my jewelry, when all of a sudden my mom comes up to me and starts yelling at me in front of this customer. I don't know if Mr. Lamborghini's energy had already like affected me in a confident way. But if there's one thing that I can attribute to Mr. Lamborghini, is that he was a very confident person. I just look over at my mom and I say, I think I go like this to her. I'm like, I look at the woman and I say, thank you so much. Like maybe I ignored my mom. I don't remember. It's all kind of a blur. What I remember is thanking this woman, waiting until this customer walks away. I look at my mom. I am so hurt. I am so sad. I feel so torn down. And I am so fucking fed up with this terrible dynamic between mother and daughter that I'm pretty sure for the first time in my life, I looked at my mom and I told her to fuck off. And you guys, if you come from a Latino family, if you have any knowledge about what it is to be Latino, you do not disrespect your parents, first of all. But second of all, telling one of your parents to fuck off is kind of like shooting them and murdering them in front of other people. That took the most guts I think I've ever had in my life. But I was so over it. I was so depleted. And I think I just reacted. And I don't remember anything after that except calling Mr. Lamborghini. He lived in Baton Rouge at the time. And I told him what happened. And he said, pack your things and come over. And you guys, my mom kicked me out of the apartment. I had just started a relationship with Mr. Lamborghini. I had nowhere to go, no family. Remember, I'm in this country basically alone with only my parents. And I moved in with Mr. Lamborghini just a few months later. Wow. As I'm telling the story, I'm like, I can't believe I went through all of that. My mom and I were not good for a long time. We barely spoke for 7 years after that. I quit working for my family. But this is where you think the story's bad now? It gets worse.